I think this might have been the laziest I've ever been when preparing for a launch, and somehow it ended up being my most successful fall spooky launch yet. What's up, you guys? If you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Gabby, and I'm about to tell you about how last year I did everything I thought I was supposed to do. Because it was back then that I had a whole 10-day countdown. I was constantly posting, teasing products, making content, preparing everything weeks in advance, and most of my orders came in almost immediately after I launched. Except this year, I did almost the complete opposite. I didn't do my usual 10-day countdown. I barely promoted the collection until a few days before launch. I used AI to make some of my mockups easier and relied on more automations, and honestly, I just didn't put the same amount of pressure on myself to make this launch this huge event. And the funny part is, while I was sitting there thinking, okay, maybe this launch isn't doing that well, but the orders were quietly starting to come in. And by the time I actually looked at the numbers, I realized I had made about twice what I made from last year's fall spooky launch. So in this video, I'm taking you behind the scenes of this year's following launch, what I did differently, and why I almost burned myself out before I even launched, and what I think actually made this launch work. So let me give you a little context, because when I say I was lazy this year, I need you to understand what normal Gabby looks like during a launch, because normally I'm doing the most. Like if dropping a small business collection was an Olympic sport, I would have been training for it. And in case that ever actually happens, please let me know, because I would probably sign up for that. And that should tell you that I usually start preparing weeks. I mean weeks in advance, probably even a month or two before. I'm literally making the products, taking pictures, creating mock-ups, planning content, writing captions, scheduling posts, making graphics, figuring out what I'm gonna tease, and then I decide that somehow on top of all of that, I needed a whole 10-day countdown. I mean, are you calling me crazy yet? Because I would. But hey, call me human, because at the same time, I genuinely thought that was what I was supposed to do. Like, I thought if I wasn't constantly talking about the launch, people would forget about it. So I would basically spend all this time trying to create this huge buildup and make a launch day feel like an event. And to be completely transparent with you, it did work to a certain extent. Last year, I remember dropping my following collection and getting a bunch of orders pretty much right away. And it was exciting. It also meant that I was immediately thrown into fulfillment mode while still trying to create content and keep promoting the launch. So I want you to picture this for a second, because imagine me trying to be the CEO, the designer, the manufacturer, the photographer, the social media manager, the marketing department, customer service. I mean, do I keep going? Because somewhere in there, I'm supposed to remember to eat lunch. Like, no ma'am. So lean in, because we're about to get real. Looking back, I think I had gotten really used to believing that the harder I worked, the better the launch would perform. And if I wasn't exhausted by the time launch day came around, I almost felt like I hadn't done enough, and this is exactly what I wanted to change this year, which is why I've been preaching it all over my socials, because this year I said enough is enough, and I decided I was not doing all that no more. And to be real, I didn't really sit down and make this big strategic decision like I'm gonna revolutionize my launch process. No, I was just tired, dude. Like, that's the thing. I was just exhausted. So after sitting down and just buckling down on what needed to get done, this is where things started to change. For starters, normally, like I said, I did the 10-day countdown, and this year I didn't. I was posting following content here and there, but I wasn't doing the whole 10 days until following, 9 days, 8 days situation. I didn't start really pushing the launch until just a few days before it actually went live. And the funny part is that my views were not exactly giving successful, collection vibes either. There were definitely moments where I was looking at my analytics like, this is getting questionable. But instead of panicking and deciding I needed to post 55 times a day, I just let it be. The second thing I did differently was starting to use tools I already have available to me, instead of making everything harder than it needed to be. For example, I used AI to help create some of my mockups, and before you start freaking out, just take a chill pill and listen. I want to make it clear. When I say I got lazy, I don't mean I stopped putting effort into my business. I mean I stopped doing things manually just because that's how I had always done them before. And if a tool can help me get something done in 10 minutes that used to take me over an hour, why am I sitting here struggling? What, for character development? So yeah, I used AI where it actually made sense, especially for mockups and visuals that saved me a ridiculous amount of time. I also leaned more into automation. There are so many little things in a launch that doesn't necessarily require me to physically sit there and do them. And I realized I had been treating every single task like it needed my personal supervision. Like, girl, the computer can handle that, literally. So instead of trying to control every single part of the launch, I started asking myself, does this actually they need me? Because if the answer was yes, then duh, I did it. But if the answer was no, then I automated it, simplified it, used a tool, or just didn't do it. And to be real, that last one was probably the hardest. Because here's the thing. When you've been running your business for a while, you start convincing yourself that everything is important. But everything can be important and still not be necessary. And I think that was the biggest difference. I wasn't trying to make the launch look like I had worked myself into the ground. I just wanted the products to be good, the shop to be ready, the customers to have a good experience, and then I wanted to go sit my ass down. Revolutionary concept, apparently. Now, even though I was doing things differently this year, there was one thing I didn't realize I was still carrying with me. The pressure. As if simplifying my launch did not automatically uninstall the part of my brain that thinks everything has to perform. Girl, I know. Sit down, grab some tea, grab some coffee, because we're in the thick of it right now. This is something I really had to work on as a small business owner, as a content creator, because I can very easily get caught up in the numbers. And before my collection even dropped, I started feeling the weight of all of that. There were a ton of times where I generally felt like I was about to get sick. And I don't mean physically sick, I mean that too, but the kind of mental exhaustion where your body is basically like, girl, you gotta sit down, like right now. And yet it felt impossible to do that because I had like 100 things to do. I had deadlines, I had products that needed to be finished, I had content that needed to be filmed and edited. I had a launch date that wasn't moving just because I was tired. So naturally, my first instinct was, nah, you gotta keep pushing it through, girl. You gotta keep going. I mean, that's what we were taught, right? To push through, work harder, get it done. You can rest after. But I had to catch myself because I know where that road leads me. Been there, done that, didn't like it. And I didn't want to wait until I was completely burned out, resentful, and unable to enjoy the launch before I decided that I needed a damn break. I actually gave myself permission to slow down. Do I need to say that again? Yeah, I actually gave myself permission to slow down. And what did that look like? Well, I took more time off. I let some things wait. I stopped trying to make every single piece of content perfect. You know, that P word we all despise. And I started listening to what I actually needed instead of constantly asking myself what else I could squeeze into the day. And I think that was probably one of the hardest parts of this launch for me. Because when you have a deadline sitting in the back of your mind, resting can almost feel irresponsible. Am I right? But this launch did not need me to be miserable for it to be successful. And I think that was a really important lesson for me. I could still have deadlines. I could still be ambitious. I could still care about the outcome without making myself pay for it physically and mentally. So I slowed down. I recouped. And I eventually got everything ready. And then launch day finally came. And the day was finally here. And let me tell you, your girl had trouble sleeping the day before or days before. And my stomach was in knots, I'm not gonna lie. The website was ready, the products were ready, and I had survived my own brain. And at this point I was like, all right, let's do this. I mean, let's get it done. And guess what? Nothing. Well, okay, not nothing. I'm being dramatic. I did get orders, but compared to last year, it was a little bit more quiet. Last year, I feel like the second that launch went live, my phone was just going. And this year I was sitting there like, okay, that's cute, but where's everybody else at? And I think because I had already been feeling nervous about this launch, it was really easy for my brain to immediately connect the two things. I didn't promote as much. My views were lower. My engagement wasn't blowing me away, and now my orders weren't coming in all at once. So naturally, my brain was like, see, you should have done more. And I think that's something I forget sometimes as a creator because we're so used to looking at content in real time. So you post something You look at the views. 10 minutes later, you're checking again. An hour later, you're checking again. I know it's not just me, but a product launch isn't a reel. People don't necessarily see your product and immediately pull out their wallet. I know for a fact I'm not that way. Sometimes we see something we like, we think about it, we come back later, we get paid, we send it to a friend, all the things. I mean, if you ask me how many things I have in my cart on Amazon right now, like, perfect example. The point is that there are a million reasons someone might not buy on launch day, and that's okay. So I decided I wasn't going to let one quiet launch day convince me that the launch itself was failing. And I'm really glad I didn't. Because fast forward days into the launch, something started changing. The orders started coming in a little bit more consistently, and then a few more, and then a few more. And it wasn't this huge explosion where I woke up on launch day and had a million orders waiting for me. I mean, God forbid, that's what a girl's dream is. But it was actually kind of the opposite. It was this really slow, gradual, like, oh shoot, okay, your girl's making some money. But that's what caught me off guard the most, because I'm so used to thinking about a launch this big, having this big moment. You prepare, you hype it up, and then you see the result. But this time it felt more like it was happening days after the launch date. And people were still seeing the products, they were still coming across the content, they were saving things, sharing things, coming back, yada, yada, yada. And little by little, those orders started stacking. So instead of spending the first few days of my launch refreshing my phone, wondering why nobody was buying, I was now refreshing my phone, seeing orders I thought were never going to come in. And low-key, I think that's a much better problem to have, if you ask me. I mean, at one point, I actually had to stop and compare the numbers, and comparing them to last year's launch, because I was curious, obviously. And then that's when I realized I had already made more than I did during the same point last year, and it was still going. And by the time I looked at the final numbers, I had made about 2 times what I made from last year's following launch. 2 times from the launch where I did less. The launch where I barely did a countdown. I mean, obviously, I don't think there's one magical reason this happened, but I do have a few theories. Now, obviously, I don't think I can sit here and say, oh, I made twice as much because I did less work, because that's not really how business works. If it was, I would have figured this out 10 years ago. I think there were actually a few things happening at the same time. The first one is probably the most obvious. My audience is bigger than it was last year. I've spent the last year creating content, building the brand, getting my products in front of more people, and just generally having more people know who Honey She's Home is. So even though my following posts weren't necessarily getting the views or engagement I wanted at the time, the people seeing them weren't necessarily brand new to me. And I think that's something that is really easy to forget when you're staring at your analytics, which brings me to the second thing. People don't always buy the second they see something. I know, shocking. Especially when you're the person launching it. You're like, okay, I posted it, where are the orders? But the customer might be thinking, oh, that's cute, let me think about it. And then they might see it again and again. And then 3 days later, they're like, all right, fine, take my money. And maybe they send it to their friend, maybe they wait until payday, maybe they weren't ready to buy the first time they saw it. And the third thing I think happened is that I may have finally built enough of a brand that I don't have to scream about every launch for people to know that it's happening. And that is a really weird realization for me. Because for so long, I thought I had to shove marketing down everyone's throats to remind people that I have something to bring to the table. But maybe the goal isn't to constantly yell louder. Maybe the goal is to build something people recognize when they see it. And I think that's what years of content, launches, products, and just showing up have been building towards. So no, I don't think the lesson here is do nothing and you'll make twice as much money. Because unfortunately, I tried that in other areas of my life and the results were not quite the same. I think the lesson is that the work you did years ago can eventually make today's work a whole lot lighter. I think that's what I was finally seeing with this launch. So after looking back, I think there's actually a lot more I learned from this than just the fact that I made twice as much money than I did last year. Because if anything, this made me question a lot of things I've convinced myself that I have to do as a small business owner. For the longest time, I thought being a good business owner meant being on top of everything. Every post, every graphic, every mock-up, every product, deadline, notification, every little thing had to be touched by me. And I think somewhere along the way, I confused being involved with being responsible for absolutely everything. Those are not the same thing. I don't need to personally hold every single piece of the business together for the business to function. And that's probably a lesson I needed to learn a long time ago. But the second thing this launch taught me is that I needed to stop judging my business based on how my content performs. Because I was literally looking at lower views, lower engagement, and a slower start and thinking, this is not working. Meanwhile, my bank account was like, what are you talking about? And that's a really important reminder for me, because social media makes it so easy to believe that the numbers we see on the screen are the numbers that determine whether our business is successful. But views aren't sales. Likes aren't sales. Followers aren't sales. They're all pieces of the puzzle, but they're not the entire picture. And the third thing, and probably the biggest thing, so are you listening? Is that I don't want my business to require me to be burnt out for it to work. I don't want every launch to feel like I'm preparing for battle. I want it to be exciting. Like, I want to be excited when I launch something. I want to actually enjoy making the products. I want to have enough energy left over to celebrate when people buy them, instead of immediately thinking about the next 60 things I need to do. I think that's what I'm slowly learning as my business gets older and as it grows. Because the goal isn't necessarily to do more every year. The goal is to build a business that works better. Having more systems, more automations, better processing, better use of my time, and honestly more trust in the fact that I've already built something that can work without me constantly forcing it to. Because maybe success isn't having a launch where you worked yourself into the ground and everything sold out in 24 hours. Maybe success is having a launch that performs well and still having enough of yourself left afterwards to actually enjoy it. And if that's the kind of business I'm building now, I am very okay with that. So I guess my biggest takeaway from all this is that I don't need to make everything harder just because I'm capable of making everything harder. Yay me. I can use the tools I have. I can automate things. I can take a day off. I can let a launch breathe. And I can still care deeply about what I'm building. And honestly, I think that's the version of my business I want to keep building. One that allows me to be ambitious without constantly feeling like I'm running myself into the ground. So, if you're also a small business owner who feels like you have to do all the things just to keep your business moving, maybe this is your sign to look at it, look at what you're doing, ask yourself, does this actually need to be this hard? Because apparently my answer this year was no. And somehow my Halloween collection still worked out better than I expected. So, thank you guys for coming behind the scenes with me for this launch. I hope you enjoyed seeing what actually went on behind the pretty little Halloween collection that I launched this year. And if you're building a small business too, stick around because I'm taking you along for all of it. I mean, if you can't tell already, your girl's getting deep. The wins, the chaos, the questionable business decisions. Oh, I'm so good at them. And let's just hopefully, fingers crossed, a little less burnt out each time as we go. So follow along, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.